right, it looks like we are live. Welcome everybody. Welcome, I'm Scott. This is Drawing Together with Artists Network. We meet every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, just like this. Today we're going to be working on this drawing of these tomatoes, keeping it really simple today with some very just simple tools. I've got my ebony pencil, I've got my shading stump, I've got a kneaded eraser and my plastic eraser, if you have a rubber eraser. This sheet of paper is about an 8.5 by 11. 8 by 10 is going to work well for you, and it's just a smooth drawing paper. So again, keeping it really simple. Before we get started though, I just want to shout out to everybody. Thank you for joining. I do want to kind of mention, check in tomorrow, this same time. We are launching our first episode of Painting Together with Gigi Chen. So I've been working with her. She's really a great painter, going to be a fantastic instructor, and kind of taking what we're doing here and drawing together, but applying it to acrylic paint. She's really kind of opening up her studio, opening up her practice to help have everybody kind of join in and follow along just like we do here. So check that out. If you are going to follow along, you're going to want to know that the reference image is in the description below here. There's also other links to artistnetwork.com. You can find the individual show page where you can share your work when it's all said and done. There's also additional drawing resources at Artist Network. We got lots of videos. We have ebooks. We have lots of things. So even if you're interested in watercolor, oil painting, pastel, acrylic painting, we've got a lot of resources available to you. So just checking the chat. I love to see where everybody is viewing from. So if you're new or if you haven't taken the time to kind of shout out where you're viewing from, I'd love to see that here. And then if you have any questions throughout the drawing demo here, feel free to type it out in all caps. It helps me to see it. Lynn is asking, can you please tell us how we'd share our drawings? Do we need to create an account? So you'll find in the description below, you'll find that link to the Drawing Together episode page. When you go there, in order to share your work, you will need to be registered. You just enter your name and a password so you can sign into artistnetwork.com, and then you can post your work that way. And I like to comment as much as I can. There's a lot of work that comes in, so I can't quite comment on everybody's work, but there are some really amazing leaf drawings posted from last week. So, all right, we'll get right to it. Hello, everybody. Oh, Jerry's is back. It's good to see you again. Margot from British Columbia. We have people from Texas, California, Florida, Reykjavik. That's fantastic. Welcome. So people from all over the world, it looks like. So hello from Alaska. I spent some time up in Alaska. I did my graduate school up in Fairbanks there. There were some questions about, just my website. I added a link in the description below. So last week there were some questions about where to find my work and how to contact me. So if you want to check out my website, that is listed in the description below as well. So perfect. We'll get started. So smooth drawing paper, yeah, a Bristol paper would work. That's a nice smooth paper as well. So this is pretty equivalent to that. This is it's this Hanamulla Skizza 190. This is what I've been using for quite a while. I love this paper. This is yeah, again, but it's just it's a nice quality smooth drawing paper. So. All right, Jan J, okay, won't be able to follow along, but we'll watch later. All right. So with this one, when you saw the preparatory drawing that I had created, and in that, my goal was to really try to create a kind of a system, like a process for it that and see how that really works, kind of be more intentional with the various stages in the drawing. So I'm going to try to do that here. And one of the things we've talked a lot about in this series is the difference between approaching a drawing through the use of line versus shape. And really, as we develop our skills as artists, and we, especially in terms of drawing, you can really choose what you would like to do, and whether you want to use line, whether you want to use shape. These are all tools that you can use to apply to every subject. So we're learning techniques for drawing, not just how to draw tomatoes, how to draw leaves, etc. You use the same set of decisions throughout all of the subjects that we approach. And so the decision we're going to make here is really going to be geared towards understanding shape as much as possible. So if you're new to that, that concept, hopefully this will make sense as we go along. Before I get going, there's a couple of questions. So the acrylic painting demonstration is the same time as this one, so it'll be 3 p.m. Eastern. So to get started, I want to get information on the page. Now the subject is, I got this from Pixabay. It's a free site of reference images. This is against a white background, so I chose this white piece of paper, and I'm not going to do a whole lot there. But I can see that center reflection right below me there in that main tomato. There's the bright reflection. I want that to be a little bit brighter than the background area. So I'm going to have that in the back of my head as we go along. But the first thing I want to do is just get information on the page so then I can start to adjust. And so what I'm doing, and I'm kind of moving through it kind of intentionally, sometimes when I approach a drawing, I just kind of wing it. I'll just react to the subject, but I'm going to really do my best to reduce the amount of lines that I create. So I'm trying to build up these general shapes using the side of the pencil, letting it roll in my fingers as I go, so I'm constantly rounding out the forms. And I'm just kind of blocking in the main shapes here. It's all really light. Let me tone this down. Let me see if that helps to... It's a little bit light right now, but we're going to continue to build up value. If you don't have an Ebony pencil, a 6B or an 8B pencil will work just fine. If you just have a 2B pencil, that'll work just as well. This is all about how we approach drawing. So I'm kind of just moving my eyes back and forth from the reference photo to the drawing. And I'm trying to just block in these forms. You can see I haven't drawn a line to define the outer edge. I'm building up shapes first. So I'm building up these kind of masses. One of the things I can see very quickly is I'm fairly small. Here I've got a lot of space here on the right. It's pretty tight on that side. So I'm going to move things over a little bit more. And what I'll actually do is I'm going to just kind of keep playing around with the scale. And it's not about getting it 100% accurate at this point. It's about getting information on the page quickly so that I have something to react to, so that I can make decisions based on what's happening on the page, not trying to decide in my head what is actually happening. So that's making it a little bit bigger. I have the camera above me is projecting on the screen in front of me. So that's what I'm looking at. And I can see that next to the reference image. I'm seeing what you're seeing right now. And so I'm going to try to compare the reference photo to the drawing. And I think what I want to do is just increase the size. Here we go. Actually, what I'm going to do is kind of just shift this over, since I'm cropping up some of the, here we go. I'm cropping off some of the drawing because of the windows on the screen here. That feels a little bit better for everybody. So I'm going to, again, using the side of the pencil, start to lay in now some of the stem. And again, just reacting. This is the gesture of the drawing. And right away, I can see that as I'm dropping the stem in, there are some issues with the proportion of this back tomato. I'm seeing that general mass, but you can see how there's a gap there. Looking at the reference photo, there is no gap. So I can start to fill that in. And I just want to try to create just a block of value that represents these forms. And I can use a kneaded eraser to start to refine some of these edges. So this is where we switch from positive space, drawing the tomato, to negative space, which is the space behind it. And throughout the drawing process, I'll be continually alternating, kind of fluctuating between positive and negative space. So it's all kind of one thing that we're observing. So changing up the direction of my marks to get some cross-hatching in there. But hopefully this is making sense to you, that the way I'm approaching this drawing. And for some artists, when I've worked with students in the past and we've worked this way, it has been a little uncomfortable because we're so used to initiating a drawing by drawing an outline. And like I said, there's no right or wrong way to do it. The challenge I'm setting for myself now is to not use line as much as possible so I can really explore shape. But it doesn't necessarily mean that this is how drawing needs to happen. This is how this drawing is going to happen. And each time you encounter a subject, you're going to use a combination of line and shape, all of those together to create the work that you want. Okay, so I just want to check, see if there's any other questions. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to call it out. If you're following along, I love to hear how things are going. If you're keeping up, if you're kind of staying on the same kind of stage as I am. Also, if you have any suggestions about future subjects, feel free to call that out here as well. Now, again, I'm using the side of the pencil. If you're new, then I just want to show that what I've done here is I've taken a razor blade and I've carved away the wood casing to expose a bit more of that core. And that allows me to take an overhand grip like this and just use the side of the pencil. And I'm mostly just using the weight of the pencil. Actually, I'm just going to wipe this down. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not worried about making this too bright. The brightest spot is going to be that highlight on the tomato. So as I kind of wipe this down, I'm building up a haze on that page. And that allows me to also build up a more gradual and even tone on the page. And I'm not worried about those highlights there. I'm going to erase that back down. As I kind of wipe this down, using the palm, not my fingers, because my fingers are more oily than the palm is, or you can use just a paper towel. All right, just building up that mass. Now I'm going to switch back to the eraser to do some negative drawing. And so as I work across, as I'm examining, say, the shape of this tomato, I'm moving my eyes back and forth between the drawing and the reference photo. And then I'm doing a kind of quick check-in. So as I move across here to this central tomato, I can take a horizontal line and see where it intersects this tomato over here. And I can compare that to the reference photo. I think this needs to come down just a touch. And then this one back here kind of starts back up in this area. I'm looking at the intersection point between the central tomato and the one on the right. And I'm trying to see them all as one mass. And my hope is that out of this, it's going to feel like a nicely unified drawing. If one of the risks we run when we initiate a drawing through the use of line is for everything to fracture, feel like they're separate elements rather than part of one kind of setting and one scene. And so this is really starting from a place of unification where everything is unified, and then from this we're going to gradually separate them. And I'm keeping these edges intentionally soft. What I liked about this reference photo is how those edges, we have a depth of field effect with the photograph where those background tomatoes are out of focus. And then there's also kind of all the bounce light coming in from the sides that makes those edges kind of degrade. So if you look at that central tomato, for example, that's a light edge. The light is reflecting around those edges against the darker tomato behind it. So that's going to be really an interesting approach. And it's not something I think we've really dealt with much in this series. So we're really kind of allowing the drawing to emerge on the page. Building it up slowly. So, oh, Nia is asking if you can share if you're trying in colored pencil. Absolutely, and you're not kind of required. I mean, if you'd like to share other work that's related to what the episode is about, you can do that as well. So. If you're doing work in colored pencil, if you're doing work in acrylics or you're painting or something, you can share that as well. Anything that's inspired by this episode, I think could be totally workable. I'd love to see that. So now what you can see that I'm starting to do is kind of work from the outer tomatoes. I'm working the whole thing at once, trying to find that inner edge. Since I know like this tomato here is light along this edge, and then this background tomato is a little bit darker. We have that light edge, and then it gets darker as we move into the interior. I'm going to start to kind of encounter that and do some negative drawing here to find that form of the central tomato. I can see the texture, the tooth of the paper is starting to play a role as well. So I'm going to have to bring out the blending stump in a bit. So I'm going to actually drop in the shadow here underneath the tomatoes. Just using the weight of the pencil here. There's really hardly any pressure. I'm actually supporting this using my fingers here to really kind of give myself some control without applying too much pressure. I like to sneak up on the values. Wipe it down. I love to do this as well. It's something I do a lot, is just to wipe everything down, and that again helps to unify. So it's kind of creating a separation and then unification of the forms. Continue to work on some negative drawing back in here, refining the forms by adjusting the shape of that background, cutting into that, into the layer that we've placed there. Hello from Venezuela. All right. Oh, Grace is asking about a series, doing an episode on sketching the landscape. Absolutely, that is. I'm in the process of working through the November subjects, and I do have a bunch of photos. So I live here in Colorado. We've had some really nice color this year when we're not burning, and I was able to get some nice kind of autumn scenes here from the mountains. So I might be able to do a nice landscape subject there. So thank you for that. And then Jerry's, you're asking the eraser. This is this one here is a plastic Tombow eraser. I really enjoy this one. And then this is just this is the Prismacolor Kneaded eraser that I like here. So all right, Grace, I'm glad that that's working for you. The idea of connecting all the shapes, kind of unifying the form, starting from a place of unification. I'm hoping that lands. And again, this is just one approach, and you can decide for yourself when you're working on a drawing, you know, how you want to approach things. This is kind of a challenge that I'm setting for myself to develop this particular skill, and I'm going to see how this works out. All right, so I'm kind of just working all of it at once. And now, like as I'm doing this, I'm trying to examine the directionality of any of my marks to see if there's any kind of directional mark that's standing out for me. Let's see. Now, this is going to be fun, dealing with the stem here. I just want to kind of refine that a little bit, give myself a little bit more to work with. And I'm intentionally using the side of the pencil again to maintain the kind of the dominance of shape in this whole process. This can be cut down. And it's helpful at this stage too to allow the focus to fall away, just to be blurred and out of focus with the vision. Then that kind of aligns with the desire for unification of the form, in that, you know, when you allow your eyes to lose focus, then the edges just kind of blur together and you see the overall masses. All right, so I'm going to drop in the highlight. Before I do that, I'm doing a quick check-in with some of the other the key kind of points. So for example, there's the basic intersection of these two right here. And if I draw a vertical line down from there, that highlight actually should be off to the right a little bit. And then I'm measuring up from this bottom edge to place that. And then looking at the distance here versus here. I think what happened, I think this is going to have to come in a little bit. So also remember, we talk about this a lot in the series, is that, you know, continually adjust the proportions. Never take them for kind of for being correct too early, especially. Oh, look at this, is interesting. Gonna give myself a little note for that broken stem right there. And there's in here it's going to be pretty delicate. When we get to this part where those leaves on the stem kind of cross over, I want there to be some sharp focus, but I'm not going to get bogged down by that. I'm going to build those up in layers. I want to get that tomato drawn in first, and then I'll build that on top. So I'll show you how to do that. Hello from Italy and from Ontario. Okay, just checking. No other questions. I hope everybody is safe. I know here in Colorado we've got some big fires burning close by, and that's been a note of concern. So I hope everybody is safe wherever you're at. If you're in California near the fires, hopefully you're being safe, able to stay safe. But all right, I think I'm at the point right now. What do I need to do? I need to add a little bit more specificity here by dropping in some of these forms. And again, I'm going to let my eyes lose focus a bit so I can see the stem here, this background tomato as a shape, not a line. Looking at the kind of the negative space as well to help with that form. And I can start to now refine some of those edges. You know, if your marks are showing up, you know, strong in your drawing, if they're noticeable marks, one of the things I like to do is here I'll make some kind of strong marks right here. You can see those come through, and you can see this light spot in here. If you're trying to even that out, my next pass will be to try to target that space in between there, and then kind of lift between the dark marks. And that helps to build that up, and I can kind of smudge that down, and that starts to fill in those marks and reduce the visibility of some of those directional marks. That was a question that somebody had in a recent drawing that we worked on. I believe it was a post in the on Artist Network, and you may be encountering that now as well. So just something to kind of think about, that kind of technique for building up a smooth area. Northern Ireland, China, all right. Yeah, everybody all over the place. So Australia, this is fantastic. Thank you all for joining. I have to say, I really appreciate the community that's formed around this. And I thank you all for taking the time and kind of committing your Wednesdays to this. All right, what do I need to do? Just kind of talking to myself. I do that a lot. All right, so I want to put this point, the stem and this main tomato, I want to get in there. Before I lock that down, I'm doing a quick check-in with some of the other key points. So like, see the bottom of this tomato. I'm going to carry a horizontal line across here, compare that to the reference photo. And I think what actually needs to happen is I think this needs to come down a little bit. So when you see a misalignment of proportions, you know, there's often more than one way to fix it. So in this case, I could raise this up or bring this tomato down. I chose to bring that down. So it's a relationship that we're exploring here. There's not really an absolute. It's all about how things relate to one another. Okay, now I want to make sure that there's room in here for these stems. And I find that intentionally using the side of the pencil keeps me from getting too detailed too early on. It's a bit of a crutch for me, because if I use the tip of the pencil, it encourages those fine details. And I know that if I do that, if I switch to this tripod grip, it sends that signal to my brain that says tighten up, add those details, and I need to override that instinct. So I'm kind of fooling myself. I think that's one of the things, and I don't know if that's something you all can resonate with as well, but I find that there are certain habits that form throughout the drawing. Some are healthier, some are less, and sometimes a habit can be healthy in one instance but not in another. So in this case, because I'm giving myself the target of really building this through shape rather than line, I have to be intentional with certain instincts and try to override them as I go. Saudi Arabia, Mexico, holy smokes, Netherlands, welcome everybody, Turkey, Ontario again. Jeff, it's 6 a.m. Good morning. All right. Yeah. It's just after 1. It's about 1:30 my time, Mountain Time. And these do go up as recordings. So if you do need to bail, if you need to get some sleep because it's either very late or very early, just know that you'll be able to watch these later. All right, so now I'm kind of moving in, kind of adjusting the form of the tomato. So there's, we talked about positive and negative space, and it's really easy to observe positive and negative space when we're talking about, say, the tomatoes in the background, right? Many times when we talk about positive space, it's the object that we're looking at. Negative space is the shape of the space around it. I also consider this to be negative space, where when I'm working on this tomato, if I'm drawing this one to find this edge, I'm thinking about this as a negative space. So my intention is to create the form of this tomato, but I'm going to be doing that by working on the one behind it and kind of building up to that edge, if that makes sense. In that way, again, that helps to prioritize the unification of the forms, because I'm not isolating my thoughts to just that one object. So much of drawing is actually kind of splitting your attention and focusing on multiple things at one time. And this can get quite a bit darker. So I'm going to switch. I'm going to be using more of a kind of a circular mark. I want to be careful along here. So I have this edge here forming for this central tomato. If I make these marks kind of follow that curve, I run the risk of popping this forward and flattening out the drawing. I want to push this one back and bring this one forward. So I'm going to switch to a mark that kind of runs contrary to that curve as much as possible. And if it's difficult to do that, try to switch to a circular mark that is more ambiguous in its directionality. As I move over here, I'm going to kind of soften those marks to kind of help create that kind of blurred focus, that depth of field. But just be mindful of that. I've seen many great drawings kind of flatten out because drawing the background marks kind of conflicts with the form. They run parallel to the form, and it kind of degrades that. Hello from Holland, Scotland, from Slovakia as well. Holy smokes. I'd love to hear too where, like, sometimes people will post and say, why was this video recommended to me? They were watching, something else entirely and it showed up in your feed. So I'd love to hear how you discovered this as well. Did it show up in your feed? Were you searching for tutorials on drawing? Were you searching for live drawing exercises? All right, now as you can see, I'm switching to this one now, kind of working on this tomato, working up to that edge. One of the things I'm also doing is I'm really trying to observe the quality of the curve of this tomato. It's not a perfect circle. And if you can break it up into a sequence of shorter straight marks, it can sometimes help to define the quality of that curve. And as I move out to the edge, again, we have that soft focus that we can incorporate into the drawing. So I'm lifting the pencil off and really kind of letting it fade out there. And I can always sharpen up that edge later, but I want to start from a point of soft focus and then gradually bring it into focus throughout the drawing process. You know, once I have something really crisply defined, it gets very difficult to soften it again. But it's easier to start with something soft and then make it have a kind of a harder edge. So I'm going to use these circular marks here, really light, just using the weight of the pencil. I'll wipe that down, help unify that a bit. And I can see the tooth of the paper, you know, there's some really kind of brighter white spots, and so you can address those. If you need to fill it in, you can kind of roll your hand up and use the tip to kind of fill in some of those light spots, just using the weight of the pencil at first to keep it light, because you don't want to really push that pencil into the paper. It makes it difficult to adjust later, and my process is all about adjusting as you go. The act of drawing is an act of discovery, and you know, we're using the drawing process to discover more about this subject. And the more you know about the subject, the more informed your drawings are going to be. But you also use the drawing process to become better informed about the subject, so they feed one another. All right, let's see. So that's starting to feel better. I'm noticing, you know, that down in here it really starts to flatten out a bit more. I want to lay down some just push more value down in here. And you can see there's a kind of a light halo along this edge, and then it shifts, gets really kind of dark along here, and I want to make that soft as well. If it's too hard, it's going to flatten things out. I'm really kind of thinking about this as being like taking a photograph where, you know, I'm looking through the camera lens and bringing it into focus. You can see I talked about, you know, running these marks parallel to this edge, so I'm kind of in a danger zone right now. So I want to be really mindful of what is displaying on the paper. Are those marks running this way? Are they strong? I feel like they're soft enough to be workable, but I'm running the risk if I make these marks too strong, again, it's going to flatten out the drawing. So I need to either run them horizontally so that they contrast against that curve, or I need to kind of use more circular marks. Just be more mindful of that. So again, just gradually sharpening up that edge. Yes, aliens are always watching. Thank you for shouting out to them. That is what I sincerely hope to be happening. All right, so one of the things I can observe right now is that this highlight that I erased out is a little bit strong, a little bit big. So I'm going to, I can cut into that a little bit, keeping it light, softening those edges. There's very few hard edges in this subject. Whenever I need more value and I need to darken it a bit more, I can lean in on it. I can just kind of push a little bit more down, but I need to make sure that I'm rotating and rolling the pencil in my fingers as I go, so I'm not getting flat spots on the lead. But you can see what a sharp point that I'm able to maintain using this overhand grip. So I very rarely have to sharpen my pencil throughout the drawing process, because if I use the side of the pencil and I'm rolling it as I go, I'm constantly sharpening that edge, and then it's available when I really need those fine details. And it also allows the graphite to float on the surface a little bit more. So that I can erase more easily once you switch to this grip, you can see how that tip just would bear down into the paper. You're going to create more of an embossed line. It's going to kind of embed the graphite in the paper more. So I try to avoid that as much as possible because I'm never sure about my marks. I'm always questioning them. And so I want marks that really float on that surface. I'm moving back, using these circular marks to refine this edge. I feel like I can really come in and refine this edge a little bit more. So as I do, I'm kind of rolling my hand up to engage the tip just a little bit more of the pencil. And as I make those marks, kind of feathering it out this way so that I don't have a line that forms along that edge. All right, in here. Erase out this negative space in here. Not very precise, that's okay. I don't need that to be precise. And I need to change up the direction of my marks there. Okay. L. McIntosh is asking, what pencil am I using? This is still the Ebony Pencil. I don't know which one this is. I think this is just the standard one, not one that's like extra black or jet black. It's just a regular Ebony Pencil. And I prefer to use softer materials. I mentioned this, was it the last episode? One of the recent episodes when I was using graphite. You know, there are some questions sometimes about using the pencil sets that have a varying range, you know, a varying range of hardnesses from a 4H to a HB to 4B, 6B, etc. Right? You know, you can buy those sets, where each pencil is either harder or softer than the one next to it. I've certainly used those pencils, and you'll see some really amazing artists that build a drawing up through a progression of those pencils. So starting with the harder, lighter materials first, and then gradually moving to the softer, darker materials. What I found in the way that I work is that can be problematic because I adjust so much as I go. I like to lay down material and lift it off, kind of carve into it when I need to. I need to be able to move the materials around. And those early stages using a harder material, even though it's light, it can sometimes feel more like a permanent mark. And so I just go right to the soft material and just use my pressure control to create the lighter marks rather than relying on the lighter graphite, if that makes sense. Awesome. I love the comments there. Mad moments go. All right, just kind of refining that edge. What do I want to do now? Just kind of talking to myself here. You can see that these are starting to form. I think I want to finish those now, then layer in this one, and then come back into the stem. So that's going to be my approach. It may be, you may find a different path to completion here. But that's just the kind of the decision I made here, kind of on the fly. And actually what I want to do, in order to do that, I'm going to bring out my blending stump and just kind of work some marks here. I want to be really careful. I'm trying to rock the mark a little bit in that, you know, there are moments in each stroke where I have a bit more pressure applied to the paper. And if I'm not mindful of that, I can build up, you know, these kind of burrs along the edge of each stroke. And so I'm going to use a circular mark, and I'm going to try to apply heavier pressure at the center of each stroke and then kind of lift off a little bit so I don't have those heavy edges, if that makes sense. And as I go through, I'm going to kind of work my way out to the edge and refine the edge and become a bit more specific with that. So moving my eyes back and forth. from the reference photo to the drawing, and now kind of correcting that shape along in here. So in that way, I've created this tomato without actually having to draw a line around it. Again, just focusing on shape. The leaf one we did, we focused on line. It just kind of occurred to me. I didn't connect those dots, but we initiated that drawing through the use of line. So if you're kind of curious, or if you didn't watch that, you can see how you can approach a drawing in a different way through line work and focusing on the contour, the edge of the object. So I'm just looking for kind of smudgy dark spots that I might be able to fill in. Thank you for some comments here. Daniela, I hope you're not making a comment that you can never draw. Drawing is a set of decisions that we make, and it's not always intuitive. You know, the people who seem to have a natural understanding of drawing, that's just how the brain works. But I firmly believe that, you know, anybody can train their brain to look for the right things in order to draw realistically. One of the things we've talked about here is really just understanding the visual system, you know, the process, how we interpret visual information. So when we're looking at the subject, it comes into our eyes as photons of light, and our eyes convert that to an electrical impulse that it sends to our brain. You know, it goes down the optic nerve to the visual kind of cortex, and we take that electrical signal and we interpret that as whatever we're looking at. So there's a lot that happens in the brain, and all of that information that our brain processes, it happens really on a subconscious level. We can glance at this in a split second, know that it's a set of tomatoes. So your brain is taking in all of those specific details, and in a split second interpreting that, and then sending to the conscious part of your brain, those are tomatoes, right? So we're not seeing all of the trillions of bits of information that tell us that that's what we're looking at. So through the drawing process, we're taking our time to really study the form. And what I've noticed, sometimes people will they'll take a glance at the subject, they'll know it's tomatoes, for example, and then just look at the page and continue to draw without ever looking back at the reference photo, and then be hard on themselves because it doesn't look like the tomato. Well, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of time and patience, and so hopefully you're just kind of being kind to yourself. It's not natural to be able to glance at something, you know, or not. When I say natural, it's not common. I mean, for somebody to be able to glance at a subject and then retain all of the specific information at once. It takes time, and so if you just give yourself time and you practice, I believe that anybody can draw exactly how they want to draw. And then drawing realistically isn't the only way to draw. You may want to be more expressive. You may want to be kind of more intuitive with the drawing rather than kind of realistic, and that's okay too. What drawing from life kind of gives you is some sort of feedback. So as you're building up hand-eye coordination, as you kind of work on your drawing here, now I have something to compare this to. Does this drawing look like that reference photo? And that gives you a certain amount of confirmation. When you're drawing out of your head or drawing abstractly, you don't necessarily have that thing to compare it to. And so it can be difficult to kind of evaluate that. But again, this isn't necessarily the way to draw. This is just one way to do it. All right, it is like, El Macintosh, it is like meditation. That is very much what it is for me. It's meditation, it's focus. It's giving my brain something to chew on, right? And not, the trillions of other things that happen throughout the day that if I can't do much about. This just gives my brain a chance to just rest and focus. Okay, what am I doing here? I'm going to work on this. This is really kind of an interesting form. Because it's out of focus in the photograph, it's hard to really tell what's going on. So what I'm trying to do is override that part of my brain that is telling me to define this, to understand what that thing is. And instead, I'm just going to think about it as an abstraction. I'll use my blending stump to actually draw this. That encourages the use of shape rather than line. And I'm just trying to look at these abstract shapes to see how they all fit together and trust that if I make the shapes, right, then they'll all come together to represent the subject. The brain, the viewer's brain will look at this and kind of move beyond that abstraction into an understanding of what this object is. So much of painting is an abstraction. We're making abstract marks on the paper, we're making abstract brushwork, colors, but in such a way that the viewer's mind pieces it together as, just like we do in the natural world, as an object, as a thing that's being affected by light. It is therapy to relax and focus. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has additional thoughts about, what role does drawing play, not just in your drawing practice, but in your life. I'd love to hear it. I know for me, it started when I was young. I was lucky enough that my parents painted a chalkboard on my bedroom wall, and I spent a lot of time just making marks on that chalkboard. And whenever things got heavy for me, I would just stare at stuff. I found myself just looking at things, and then eventually, I found myself, for whatever reason, picturing in my head how I would draw it. And I don't know really where that came from, but it just did. And for some of you, it may be a storytelling device, needing a way to express certain thoughts or feelings or events. Mine was very much more of a meditation. Yeah, it's good at killing time. All right, Mr. Blue Sky, yeah, thanks for the comment about the skull here. Got a couple of those drawings. I've drawn him now twice in this series, so if anybody wants to see how that skull was drawn, you can find that in the playlist, or if you go to artistnetwork.com, if you go to the Drawing Together landing page, you'll find the whole list of the shows based on subject. Oh, there's a question about the blending stump. I'd love to talk about that more. For those of you that have been with me, you've kind of heard me talk about the blending stump and how it's been a surprise tool for me because I never used it in drawing. I actually had a strong aversion to it. And it's hard for me to articulate why, but I just rejected it. But I started using it in the series and I love it now. And the trick to it is to recognize that it is a tool for mark making, not just smoothing things out. So you can see how it's picking up graphite. I can use this now to actually refine the forms. And it's a great way to make subtle and soft marks. And so it is also effective at kind of smoothing things out, but it's also an opportunity to define that form. So as you're working with the blending stump, play around with the pressure. Try with just the weight of the material, then try leaning in on it and roll it in your fingers as you go so you're kind of evenly distributing whatever is being built up on that stump. And I use it on its side. That keeps a sharper point there, just like with the graphite. And it allows me to use kind of broader marks. And there may be instances where you actually want some of the texture of the paper, and you can kind of play around with that contrast between something that's really smooth and something that is rough. So just like we have going on here. And so I may allow some of this texture to show through more here to help align with the texture of the tomato itself. That makes sense. Colleen, yes, well, this is an ebony pencil that I'm using. It's equivalent to about a 6B or an 8B pencil. All right, so now that we're on this side, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and start working on that stem. And you can see in the reference photo that there's this leaf here that comes in and crosses over into the darker tomato behind it. So I'm just using the weight of the pencil. I'm trying not to outline anything at this point. Again, I still want to think in terms of shape, just smaller shapes. And so what I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going to bring in this rubber eraser, kind of erase that down. And I've overstated it. It's too big. And so now I can take the side of my pencil and I can work up to find that edge. And really kind of thin that down. And I want to kind of assess that, make sure I haven't created marks that are too dark around that. I don't want to create kind of these dark halos. I can kind of get that little twist of that leaf there. Using the side of the pencil still. I'm not really using the tip at all. And then block in some of these darker forms. You know, drawing is really a relationship between the artist and the materials. And in a lot of these materials, they need to be kind of massaged and played around with. If I had started this with line and I'd outlined this, I would have run the risk of creating a line that's too dark and it would have flattened out. So all right, welcome, McKenna. A gifted young artist, so welcome. Okay. Just gonna block in some of these. Now, as I'm going through, I'm kind of refining some of these forms. Again, I'm trying not to let the line work lead the decision. So as I come across here, there's this leaf that is light against that dark background. So I need to do the same thing as I did above. I'm going to use the kind of corner of the eraser, kind of erase out where that goes. It's too big and not very specific, so now I'll work from the outside edge to, from in the kind of the tomato area and kind of work up to find that edge. And I'm really trying to be sensitive to the weight so that I don't create those dark lines around it. And circular marks help to break that up. And this is not going to be 100% accurate because we got to move this drawing along. But it hopefully, like one of the things I've talked about this, and I'm sure for those of you who have been with me for a while are probably sick of hearing this, but the process that I try to demonstrate, my hope for you is that if you use this process, it puts you in control of how much detail you want to add. So you can have there are some really amazing drawings out there that have very little detail and some that are hyper realistic. And for me, I get a little claustrophobic when I think about having too much detail in there. Sometimes I want that feeling of precision. Sometimes I don't. But if you build up your drawing all as a whole, it kind of allows you to decide when you're done and how much you want to do that, how much detail you want, and ultimately what experience do you want to have. Remember, marks are thoughts, and the marks that I'm making kind of can express something about my inner state, and sometimes it can also drive that. If I feel out of focus, if I feel like I'm kind of rambling and running all over the place, my brain is all out of whack, then I may intentionally work on a subject that that inspires me to be more focused and detailed as a way to calm my brain down. Or sometimes I just need to be expressive and get everything out, like, and not let my marks kind of be too confined. So just kind of think about that. Like, what experience do you want to have, and how can your marks reflect that experience or guide that? All right, so you can see that I wiped everything down here, building up that haze again that I talked about, and that just killed those highlights there. So now I can use my kneaded eraser to kind of lift up some of that a bit more, and I can come back into it and keep working. The drawing process for me is not a one and done thing where I work on an area and I never touch it again. Actually, I kind of like that in the reference photo it curls over a bit more, so I'm going to adjust that. Oh, you can see that I just made that dark line. It's reading like a halo around that edge. It's too strong. That. Just cut out a huge chunk of that. Now I'm going to refine this down. Those details can be really tricky sometimes, but as I read, I like that. I like that curve a little bit better. Okay. Oh, Nia has just posted a comment about your sister. That is really hard to hear. Like, some of those comments can be really devastating for especially artists when they're younger. We tend to kind of internalize those thoughts, and sometimes we don't have really kind of a healthy perspective on drawing and how to manage feedback. I think delivering feedback is a particular skill that it's often, we don't spend a whole lot of time considering, but and also being open to feedback can be really challenging. So on that note, if you guys are seeing something that looks off, or if you have a suggestion on how this could be improved, I always welcome those things. You all have, as a community, have helped me through some, many troubling spots in my drawings. So if you're new, just know that I welcome that kind of feedback. Sure, I do take things personally sometimes, but if it means that my drawing is going to improve because of a comment somebody made, I have to kind of take that and kind of absorb, that any sort of negative feeling I may have. Of course, there's a part of me that always wants to hear everybody say, "That's a great drawing." But what's ultimately going to help me is when somebody says, "That's a great drawing, and here's how it could be better." So. All right, let's see. Oh, Maddie's mom is asking about going over again the direction of the shading and flatten the subject. So what I'm looking at, we've talked about this before with regards to halos, right? So the edges of objects are really critical areas. So how those edges are managed can make a big difference in how the subject is interpreted by the viewer. So if we're going for realism, then you want edge variation. You want there to be a constant kind of shift as you follow along an edge. And you want to be careful of kind of halos forming, either light or dark marks that follow along the outer edge of the subject. And so, for example, if I'm looking in here, we can see the direction of marks pretty easily. We're really good at picking up those subtle marks. And the way we layer those marks can impact how those edges are interpreted, the ones that I was just talking about. So we have this curve of this tomato here running this direction. If I run marks this way, and the brain can really, if I can see those marks, there's a tendency for the brain to attach these marks with this edge. It says they're running in the same direction, so they must be part of the same thing. But we know at the same time that those are supposed to be two separate tomatoes. So it creates this conflict in the mind. The brain doesn't know what to focus on, so it kind of flattens everything out. And so if you have two objects that are different places in space, if those marks that you're using to create those objects move in different directions, it can be helpful in creating more of that space, if that makes sense. So if we have a curve here, I can run these marks horizontally to contrast that curve, and it's less likely that the viewer's mind will attach them together. It's going to view them as separate objects because the marks are running in different directions. Hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of part of, when you study design theory, you learn about the Gestalt principles, the way we interpret visual information. There are many kind of laws that describe how we can look at a piece of artwork and understand that it's a set of tomatoes here, for example. And in one of those laws, kind of describes how we generally think that the marks that move in the same direction belong together, and when in this case we don't want them to belong together, so we should change the direction of the marks, change something in there to break that up. Sayoli's art studio. When I paint, sometimes I have the feeling that everything disappears around me. Maybe when you're into it, you're too into it. Does anyone else have that feeling? I totally get that. Definitely at art school, I would get into that zone. I remember working on a painting for 8 hours, and I thought it was just a couple hours. The whole day went beyond me, and you come out of it, it's kind of like coming out of a movie, right? Where you walk out of the theater and you're like, where am I? That happens a lot when drawing. But thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really astute observation. You have the drawing in the thumbnail already? Yes. So Damon Case 7, you're asking about the thumbnail. So what I do before each episode, I do a version of the drawing. So that's what I have here, and that's what's in the thumbnail. And this helps me kind of think through really what the point of the drawing is, and it gets me prepared a little bit more. It also just helps everybody to see where are we going with this thing. So I find that it's really helpful to have that. So that's what you're observing is the preparatory drawing. And part of that also is working out the materials that I want to use, which medium, whether I want it to be charcoal or graphite. All right, so we are, let's see. How do you prevent the shininess of graphite when you're drawing? That's another good question. I don't really know. I mean, the more you bear down on it, the shinier it's going to get. You build up those layers, and then it gets really difficult to layer stuff on top of it. So that is one of the challenges when working with graphite. It's just the fact that it's so metallic in nature. I don't know if there's a way to really prevent that, but my suggestion would be to play around with different papers, different surfaces. And so if you use say a cotton rag paper, it's just got a different tooth that may hold the graphite in a different way. So hopefully that makes sense. Tom Brown has said to prevent shininess, press the tip layer by layer and don't press. Yeah, I think allowing the tooth of the paper to interact with the material, I think is really kind of key. All right, this needs to come down a little bit. Kind of lifting off along this edge. I want it to be a very soft edge on that highlight. Oh, let's see. Grace is asking a fantastic question. how do you differentiate shapes in a monochrome drawing without color if the values are the same? I'm looking at leaves on the tomato on the right, and it looks the same value as the red. Yeah, there are definitely areas where the value relationships are very difficult, but because they have a high color contrast, you can sometimes you kind of have to make a decision, and so you have an area that's highly visible because they're highly contrasting colors, but again, there's very little value contrast. So sometimes I will just kind of invent, I'll kind of push the red a little bit darker than it needs to be, maybe the green a little bit lighter in order to kind of highlight that. Sometimes I'll actually use a line to define that edge to make that edge pop, but keep the values very similar. But when we get down to that edge, I might be able to, if I can find that area that you're talking about, I have to look a little bit closer. But I know exactly what you're talking about. In graduate school, I went to the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, and in the Great Hall there, they had this carpet that's red and green, like blocks and stripes. And I remember in one class, I was teaching a drawing class there, and we went out to that Great Hall, and I didn't give them any prep. I just said, let's just go out there and draw. And they get to the carpet, and you can see, in some of the students' minds, they're like, what is happening, right? How do we make this happen? How do we do the red and the green are the same value, but they're highly visible, and so we just kind of experimented and played around with that, and it is a limitation with black and white drawing, monochromatic drawings in black and white, because we don't have the extra qualities of hue and saturation to factor in. So, all right, so I'm really trying to study the subtle relationships of the value here. Just using the side of the pencil again, these small circular marks. I'm laying it down a little bit heavier, and I'm trying not to be try not to have edges that are too sharp, especially as I'm working into this lighter edge there. It's a very soft transition. So I'm trying to just sneak up on it. And it's a little bit lighter down in here in general. And I might artificially darken this area around the highlight just a bit more to pump that up a little bit. Pump up that contrast to make that highlight feel more intense. Value is all about relationships. There's a particular relationship between each of those values, and controlling that contrast. It affects how you interpret each of those values. You can take one value and you can say, "Hey, that looks dark." You put it against something next to it that's lighter or darker, and it'll say, "Well, that's a dark value." It can seem to change right in front of our eyes. So how does that look? I think I want to add a little bit more definition up top here. So I'm going to work my way up to the edge using these soft circular marks. I want to be careful not to create a line. And why? Because that's the particular challenge I set for myself in this drawing. I can sharpen up that edge, but again, I want to be really careful not to create a dark halo there. Okay. This is a little bit too strong in here. I can knock this down a bit. Kind of wash over this whole area. So this light along in here is too strong. And it gets darker right under here. Remember, like these observations, through the drawing process, you become more observant of the subject. It's so easy. I mean, we've even done that in part of the series. Is get through a drawing and realize I missed something enormous. I can't remember who said earlier about everything kind of falling away. That can happen in a drawing as well. You can focus on one area, everything else in the whole drawing falls apart. So if you haven't already, take some time to step back from your work, change the context of your drawing so you can see it fresh in a new way. All right, this area here is going to be really tricky, and this might be what you're talking about earlier about the value relationship between the green part here and the red, and they look so similar. So let me see, I gotta play around with this a little bit. There's some areas where it's like right in here it's darker than the tomato. And there's some areas where it's lighter. All right, thank you everybody. If some of you have had to jump out, that's awesome. Thank you for joining me. We're gonna go, it's probably gonna be another half hour. But this does go up as a recording, so if you wanna kind of watch the rest of it later, you can certainly do that. All right, so how am I gonna do this? I'm trying to articulate what's happening down in here. So what I wanna do, here's how I'm gonna break this apart. Colleen is saying, I have to stop and breathe. I get so locked into the pieces I draw. Exactly, yeah, breathe. Don't forget to breathe, it's so easy. And then Recovering Souls, to me the green seems darker than the red. Is that an optical illusion? So we've talked about this before. It is a bit of an optical illusion, but it's also correct in some areas. There is a term, there's the local value and then the optical value. The local value is the color that you're seeing, or it's the value of the color you're seeing as unaffected by light, right? So it's the green, it's the red. When you apply light to something though, that can change. So for example, you have the highlight here, that's white. That's not a white spot on the tomato. We know that tomato to still be red, but we understand that to be a highlight. And that can be sometimes very difficult to sort out in the mind. And so what I'm doing here is really prioritizing the optical value. What is, if I kind of forget that I'm looking at a green stem or a red tomato, I'm just looking at the value relationships. Is this part lighter or darker than the spot around it? And it's really difficult to tell at this point. So I need to start kind of defining these forms. So one of the things I'm starting to do is look for the shapes of the dark, and I'm going to try to get those in there. I'm going to try to block in some of these forms, looking at the negative space, those holes there. So using this blending stump, I'm kind of refining these forms, being careful not to create lines. And right in here, I'm going to have to refine this a little bit more. And then I'm going to try to apply another layer on top of this that expresses the optical information, the light and shadow on there. And I just kind of refine that form and kind of block it in. And then I can use my eraser to kind of define that. So let me lift out. This is getting a little bit messy right in here. Okay. What I think I want to do is, so if I'm looking in this shadow area, the tomato on this side is darker than the green part, but it's all relatively dark. So what I'm going to do is darken this kind of, there's this rim back in here that's a little bit darker. And then it kind of falls into this form shadow here. Form shadows are part of the objects that are in shadow. It's the dark part on the object. Cast shadows are the shadows that are cast by the object. So in this case, it's a form shadow I'm looking at here. Okay. And so this is all relatively dark there. And I can kind of refine this. I'm going to look at this shape here, this kind of teardrop shape between these bands of the green. Darken that, and then I can see another one up here. Kind of looking at the angle. This has got to come down at an angle more. Okay. And then I come over here. This is darker, this is lighter, and then we switch to an area that's a little bit darker. So I'm just kind of talking through just the basic things, that the kind of decisions that I make in my mind. Now is the time where I start to become a little bit more logical, I guess, linear in my thinking, to try to solve this problem a bit. Now, so I have the basic relationships established where you have, dark to light to dark, but they're not quite correct. I can now lift out some of the values here, make this lighter in value to align with the reference photo. Actually, and they've got these cool little kind of the stripes, the lines of the leaf there that I'm going to use my eraser to kind of reflect that. It goes into shadow here. And if it's too much, I can just wipe it down, and that drops down the value just a touch. All right, and then we can come under here. The stem passes through here. And so because I have that whole form blocked in, I can focus a little bit more on these details, and I don't have to worry so much about the proportions. So it's one of the reasons why it's helpful to not kind of finish as we go. It's to, kind of build it up all at once. Because once you start to really focus on a specific detail, it's so easy to kind of get locked in on it and lose an understanding of what that whole form is. So just using this blending stump to create that leaf there. And then looking at this relationship here, it's perhaps a little bit too light, but where these forms overlap, it casts a little bit of a shadow, so a little bit darker underneath that form, and that helps to create that three-dimensional structure there. So, when we're focusing on value, it all starts with first the fundamental value relationships. Is one thing lighter or darker? You establish that, and then it becomes an issue of how much lighter or darker. You kind of massage those values, either make things lighter, make it darker based on what you're observing. But if you're not quite sure, kind of start with those fundamental observations. All right, and I kind of actually that's a good value here. I'm going to darken this, use circular marks so I don't have marks to get all jumbly there. Kind of refine, looking at that negative space there to define that portion of the stem. You can see now it's kind of catching the light there. All right, thank you. If anybody does have to go, thank you for watching. We're going to keep at this for a bit. If you're new, welcome. This is Drawing Together. My name is Scott Maier. I work with Artist Network. We have lots of resources for artists. My primary job is to produce a lot of the videos and online education experiences we have at Artist Network. But I also do this, and it's been a lot of fun. So one of the things, I'm allowing the marks to become a little bit stronger as I work in the stem because there's that change in texture. You can see these lines and kind of striations in the leaves there and in that stem. Switch back to this overhand grip. I find that the overhand grip, especially when working with texture, can sometimes be more effective for whatever reason, it creates marks that feel more naturally formed compared to using the tip of the pencil. I'm doing some negative drawing there, thinking about this thin little sliver of light on the edge of this stem there. And then so it's light here against that dark background, we come across here, and that background becomes a little bit lighter. Actually, I don't want to mess with that too much. I don't kind of like the way that edge degrades. I'm going to sharpen this edge along here. You have this cut on the stem. Again, I'm mostly concerned with getting those value relationships right. Am I going from, as I move from object to object, is it lighter or darker than the thing around it? I think we're pretty well done, pretty close to done here. We can continue to add details, but again, the process that I like to use allows us to really kind of control how much detail we want. So I may look at this and say, hey, that's sufficient. I like that area there. Or you may look at it and say it's insufficient. It needs to have more detail. You can kind of be in control of that. If you start a drawing with a high degree of detail, and you kind of have to build it out through the whole drawing, and that can sometimes be confining. Just dropping in some of the shadow on the ground. I'm trying to be mindful of its kind of horizontal nature. So when you're working on that shadow, try to think about where do those marks intersect the form, the tomato or the stem there. Because there can sometimes be a tendency to make that shadow too big. We understand the shape that it's casting on the floor, but because of the angle here, it's kind of been reduced to this thin sliver. And we want to represent that thin sliver. So looking at the points of intersection can be really helpful in determining that. All right. Well, thank you all. So again, we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. I believe I'm doing a kitten next time. That'll be a fun one. We've drawn a cat. This is a kitten. And I'm going to be working on some more landscapes for November, especially with some of the cool, nice aspen colors that we have here in Colorado. I was able to get up there before it all lit on fire. So we're doing some landscapes. I also want to get back to some portraiture or some facial features, things like that. It's been a while since we've done that, so we're going to dig into that. But if you have any suggestions, feel free to throw them into the chat quickly. It has been an awesome experience for me today, so thank you all. Don't forget to join us at the same time tomorrow with Painting Together Gigi Chen. The description is in the link is in the description below, so check that out. That is going to be a fun class. It's live, so who knows what's going to happen. You all have been incredibly patient with me through some very trying technical things. I think we have that all worked out for Gigi, so it should go off without a hitch, but it kind of is what makes it exciting, right? So it has been a blast. So thank you all for the comments. There's a question about achieving the blur. If you did join us late, we kind of, you can watch the whole thing from the start, and you can kind of see how we're able to kind of control the focus on this drawing a bit, because we're approaching this through the use of shape rather than line, and that's what allows that. I do want to kind of sharpen up in a few areas, the edges. Just being mindful not to create a line and feathering things out. But I do feel like the form needs to be sharpened up a touch. And just in a few areas it can be sufficient for making it all read as complete. Oh, a chimpanzee, that's a good one. A puppy. I have good friend Sawyer, if you're watching. Good friend Sawyer, he just has a new dog named Bagel that I think would make a fantastic subject. So I'm coming up, buddy, and I think I need to do a drawing of your puppy. A horse or a cow again, that would be really good, Heather. Thank you for that suggestion. I think there's some really good opportunities here for that. All right, thank you all. Draw something is asking a question. How long have I been drawing for? Are you asking kind of in general? This show is we're about an hour and a half total for this drawing, but I have been drawing kind of intentionally for, I don't know, I really started to give it a go in high school. So how many years ago was that? About 25 years, 26 years, somewhere around there. Went to art school and started to focus on that. And then I taught drawing for a while. And one of the reasons I started up the series is that drawing is something I had neglected in my painting practice. And so this has been a great way for me to develop those skills. Reflections in objects through water. That's a good one, Grace. Thank you. How about a car? Yeah, yes, that was one of the very early episodes. Somebody had requested a car, and it is always running in the back of my head trying to find the right subject, and I've been avoiding it because it's challenging, and I'm not sure I could get it done in one episode. So that might have to be a multiple episode, at least to do it to the degree that I'd like to. Maybe I just need to find a more simple subject for that one, but the car would be a great one. I also want to do some more architecture. I think would be great. A tabby cat would be great. Fishbowl would be another one. Yeah. So draw something saying I want to go to art school, but my parents say it isn't a good career choice. I went to art school. I went to graduate school. Made it through. I certainly had my struggles, but it's definitely something to consider. Things are different now than it was when I was in school. What I hope to happen though is if it's something that you want, that you're able to find a way to make it happen for you. There's so many ways now that you can get a good art education. We just recorded an episode of our podcast, Artbound, or the one that just launched today. They have some really interesting comments about art school. And then we recorded one yesterday where it's all about teaching as an artist. So we have two artists, Christy Gordon and then Trey Egan, two very different artists that teach very different ways, sharing their belief that art education is valuable and important for everybody. So I think taking some time to get feedback from a lot of people will be really helpful to making your decision. Let's see. Draw a blank piece of paper. That would be a good one. That would be an easy one. I could do that, no problem. Drawing from life. How should you light it? I want to see if I have any. I don't have any of my reference photos here, but I've found that natural light is the best. Especially a side light. This is kind of a classical setup that you'll see a lot in, say, Northern European paintings or something, where a strong side light, you have the object set up, and then it's relatively dark behind there. Try that out, where you have a distinct light source and a limited amount of interference from backlighting coming in. When you're taking a photograph of something that might be a little bit different than what you need for a drawing, but a strong directional light source can do it. As long as it's not so close to the subject that it's blowing it out and creating highlights that are too strong. But if you can reduce the direction of light, so if you, like in this room, for example, I have one main light over here and a few others kind of bouncing all over the place. And it's probably not a great opportunity for a still life setup. It's good for drawing because I have a nice even light over my subject, over my drawing, but in terms of the subject itself, it would be a challenge. And so you might kind of consider that, and then consider your angle, how it's rotated in relationship to you, how high or low you are. I like how low we are to these tomatoes here, but kind of consider the light source. This is, again, this is a stock photo that I found that I think it works out okay, but if I were to set this up myself, there's too much light. I would want a stronger light coming in from one side and a stronger cast shadow so I can really see that form effectively, if that makes sense. And then, oh, is there a shadow above the tomato on the left? That is a good question. I thought I observed that as well. It's hard to see. I have it up on this screen over here, and I don't see it, but I see it on the small screen in front of me. And so it's something that's really, really kind of subtle. All right, a flamingo would be a great one. An iguana. Oh my God, I drew an iguana in high school, and that took forever. That was a lot of fun. I'll see if I can do that. Swans would be good. Forest with sun rays, that could be a good one. I have been thinking a lot about sunsets. Again, we did one early on in the series where we focused on a sunset, and those rays were a lot of fun, but coming through the forest would be an interesting. Don is saying, I have a fine arts degree and always been able to find work as a graphic designer. There are, yeah, I mean, I think I really am glad that I went to art school. It worked out for me. I've been able to, you know, I've had many different types of jobs, but I'm really grateful that I can stay in the field this way. So I think it's, you know, you got to make the decisions you got to make for yourself. There are definitely opportunities out there, but I think there are very few kind of jobs where it's, you know, it feels secure, right? So I had to do this because this is what I had to do. And I know it terrified my parents. So I get it, and I was stubborn about it. So I just had to do it. They supported it. I am very grateful for that. And I also have found that I love teaching, and so that's something that is important to me. But hopefully you find your way, figure out what works for you. If not, you can always come here and draw with us. So thank you so much. All right. I think I'm going to call it a day. It looks like the comments have kind of come through. This has been a fantastic conversation, so thank you so much. I can't wait for next week. Check us out again Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Check out Gigi tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern. You can go to the Artist Network webpage, find all that information. In the description below, I have the link to more information about Gigi and her work. So super excited. We also have Johannes, who's been doing paint-alongs for a long time with us. He's fantastic. So check out upcoming paint-alongs with him if you like these live experiences like this. So I'm going to sign off. Have a great weekend, everybody.